Hi, everyone. Welcome to the All Things Amyloid podcast, where we feature patients, caregivers, and clinicians who discuss amyloidosis, a rare and incurable disease. Amyloidosis occurs when the body builds up abnormal amounts of misfolded amyloid protein, which can lead to serious and life threatening outcomes. I'm your host, Mackenzie, an amyloidosis patient and founder of Mackenzie's Mission. Our goal for this podcast is to raise awareness and share firsthand what it's like to live with this disease, to care for those affected by it, and to treat it. We hope this leads to earlier diagnosis and start of treatment, which will improve patient lives. In today's episode, we'll be talking about second opinions. I'm happy to have with me today Mike, who's going to share his experience with second opinions during his journey with AL amyloidosis. Most patients may not think about getting a second opinion or know when that even may be appropriate. Yet, it's right that all patients have. And we're going to explore this today. Welcome, Mike. It's great to have you here with us today.
Great to be here.
All right. So, to begin, Mike, could you share a brief summary of your journey with amyloidosis?
Yes, glad to do so. Amyloidosis, I might preface that it's a very complex condition and it affects patients differently. With my symptoms, fatigue, loss of weight, dramatic weight, 15 to 20% of my body weight, lack of energy, easy bruising, um, muscle mass, and then I found out later I had kidney dysfunction. And weeks turned into months going from doctor to doctor, provider. They couldn't decide. And finally, I had a hematologist do a test and direct me to a hematologist. And the hematologist did a bone biopsy. It said I had a condition called multiple myeloma. So it's cancer of the plasma cells. And he said that I needed to start chemo right away, and his office would contact me to schedule that. But before they do a patient education.
Hmm.
And so his office called me once, twice, three times. They seem to have forgotten about the patient education. And and I did my research online. I talked to various groups, national organizations, local groups, individual patients, and all my research found that the experts were in my backyard at Mayo Clinic. So I wanted to pursue a second opinion, and I was going to see the initial hematologist anyway. And I felt like we had a great relationship, and I respected him, and I wanted to tell him in person that I was going to seek a second opinion. So I met with him, and I told him I was going to seek a second opinion. And his response took me back because he said, "I think that's a great idea."
Hmm.
And I told him I didn't think he'd respond that way. Uh, and he wanted to know where I was going to get a second opinion, where the experts were at Mayo Clinic. And so I went there the following week. They did their own testing and workup and said, reconfirmed my diagnosis at the time was multiple myeloma. They also, I found out later that they're also the amyloid experts as well. So in their testing, they said, yes, you do have a multiple myeloma, but you don't need treatment at this time. So after a year and a half, my light chains continued to increase. My symptoms increased as well. The fatigue, they're very persistent. My kidney dysfunction got worse.
Hmm.
And so they decided to do a kidney biopsy. And the kidney biopsy showed I had amyloidosis. Well, just like multiple myeloma, I had no idea what that was. So I did a lot of research on it. And they also educated me as a patient, but also they had seminars. I would attend seminars locally as well as nationally through the internet. And I think that was very helpful on my behalf. So after a year and a half, when I tested positive for another diagnosis, in this case, amyloidosis, they said you need to start chemotherapy right away. And so we started chemotherapy for 3, 4 months. And And as a patient, you have to be all in, not just touching the water, but you need to be all in, ready to go because you've got a lot of people behind you, not only the hematologist, but a whole team. And I like Mayo Clinic because there's an internal network. I could see everybody, all the specialists in one area. So that today, I still have issues with the weight loss and um, strength, muscle mass, fatigue, energy. Um, and my light chains are being monitored on a regular basis, as well as the kidney function.
Mhm. Yeah. So let's circle back. I think this is a really interesting point about how your initial hematologist oncologist reacted to you wanting to get a second opinion. Just to elaborate on that
Oh
interaction.
yes, and like I mentioned, I was not. I was ready for him to come back to me and say that um, I was thinking I was trying to undermine his expertise, his education. But
Mhm.
his response surprised me because he said, "I think that's a great idea." And he went up further on to say, if you have a doctor, clinician that does not want you to get a second opinion, maybe you don't need to see that doctor.
Yeah. So kind of the other side of the coin is they have more of a negative reaction when you ask for a second opinion. So if that were the case, if that were what had happened, how do you think you would have reacted to that in the moment?
Well, that's a good point because I was ready for that, and I
Mm.
kind of expected that,
Mhm.
and so I was ready for it, and I would be firm and proactive in my care because I valued him, his expertise, because he was able, after all these months, he was the only one that could put a name on what my condition was.
Mhm.
And so I had a name for my condition. So I appreciated that. And it was nothing to undermine him. I may circle back to see him, but I think it's important to get at other viewpoints. And that's what I chose to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important that kind of as healthcare providers, we just as a healthcare provider, but kind of the healthcare provider community in general understand that sometimes when we want to seek second opinions as patients, it's not personal by any means. I think it comes from sometimes a place of fear, right? Being afraid that, oh, maybe this is the diagnosis. I want to be really sure before I go down this path. Or maybe it's a place of, wanting confirmation. This is a big diagnosis and it comes with a lot of implications. And you want to be really sure before you start thinking about going down a treatment pathway that could involve chemotherapy and really some potentially life altering medications. So just kind of remembering that this isn't personal and that, like you said, I think it's really important to understand that we're appreciative as patients that you were able to first identify that, and often that's the most difficult thing. So there is a lot of value in that. Often a
Mhm,
second opinion
mhm.
isn't personal, but that's a little aside. But tell me a little bit about your motivations for wanting to get that second opinion.
Well, in my research, and before I move on to that, I want to emphasize his office had called me several times to start chemotherapy right away. And the
Hmm.
last time they called me, they asked if I was refusing treatment against medical advice.
Wow.
And I said, not at all, because I want to make sure this is a direct course of action for me.
Yeah.
This is a big step for me, as it should be for anybody listening to this podcast or any patient.
Hmm.
And you should be proactive on that.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to emphasize that aspect. And Mackenzie, you want to go ahead and rephrase that question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So really just trying to understand what your motivations were for seeking a second opinion ultimately.
Mhm. And I think that's valid for every patient, to see what the options are to make sure there's not a misdiagnosis because amyloidosis is so often overlooked, misdiagnosed, misunderstood. And I can attest to this because the number of doctors I saw, they couldn't tell me what it was or what was going on. It was way over their head. And one doctor, that my primary care doctor, I was very frustrated with when he said, I told him losing so much weight and muscle mass. I'd lost 20% of my body weight. And I knew he was in over his head when he came back and said, "Well, you're good for your height." And that's when I decided I needed to go to see other doctors. And I think that seeing a second opinion is important, um, to reinforce your direction, your decision. And as I mentioned before, you got to be all in when you do a treatment, and not just touching the water, feeling the water, but all in physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are some really great points that you make. And so, in addition to confirming the diagnosis of amyloidosis, you know, what might be some other reasons you think that patients might seek out a second opinion?
Well, see what options were available. And just like my situation, I went to the first hematologist. He said, I have 20% involvement. And getting a second opinion, they said, yes, you've got uh, 10% of involvement, but you really don't need treatment at this time. And I really didn't need treatment for a year and a half until I was diagnosed with amyloidosis. And so I think it's very valid that you be proactive in your care as a patient, and also get that support from family and a caregiver. Even though I'm very proactive as a patient, my wife will go with me on critical situations, and she'll come up with questions that I don't think about, or we'll review some things or what our options are, and she'll note a number of things that I didn't think about that the doctor or the provider may have indicated.
Hmm.
So I think that's important, to be proactive and to seek out a second opinion, seek out a third opinion, because it needs to be to your satisfaction. It's important that you have confidence in that doctor. You have a good relationship with them. I did with the first doctor. I really valued him diagnosing me, since I'd gone through a number of doctors that couldn't give me an answer. But the neurologist that I was working with went a step above and did some special testing and contacted the hematologist, and he reconfirmed it. And I felt like he had something invested in me, and I had confidence in him. But it was my decision to seek a second opinion, and that's where I found the amyloid experts were at Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, I think you make some really excellent points here, particularly about finding a provider who meets who you're satisfied with, right? That maybe even not a second opinion enough, a third, a fourth, a fifth, whatever it takes to feel satisfied and exactly like you said, confident that the person caring for you is up to the challenge and kind of understands the uniqueness of your particular situation as a patient. So I think that's some excellent points. It's interesting for me. Back in 2017, I received my initial diagnosis from a hematologist following a bone marrow biopsy. And he admitted that he wasn't terribly knowledgeable about the disease. He specialized more on the multiple myeloma side and just didn't particularly feel confident or comfortable treating amyloidosis. And, I appreciated that he was honest. And you could tell when he told me, I think it's amyloidosis, you could just feel the uncertainty in his voice. And it just left me feeling concerned. Right.
Mhm.
So, um, what I thought was really interesting was that he recommended that I go to a center of excellence for amyloidosis. And he recommended both the Mayo Clinic and Boston University. And within 2 weeks, I was just like you right there at the Mayo Clinic, going through the full battery of tests. And they did, in fact, diagnose and type my amyloidosis as AL amyloidosis. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I requested a second opinion, but I appreciated that the diagnosing physician knew enough to point me in the right direction so I could rather get a confirmation of his suspicion.
Mhm. May I interject there and,
Yeah.
and say, I applaud your doctor to direct you to specialists or subspecialists that were there are experts in the field of amyloidosis. And I think that's so important. And I applaud this doctor that directing you to someone that can give you better care than himself versus struggling or learning as he went.
Yeah.
And I applaud that. And kind of like when my first doctor, he diagnosed me, wanted me to start on treatment right away. And he wanted to know where I was going to get my second opinion. And he said, they're the experts. And he also
Yeah.
said, I'm sure they'll concur with me because they're the ones that developed the protocol I was going to set you on. So I applaud your doctor for having the foresight and the courage to direct you elsewhere.
Yeah, no doubt, because it does. It takes courage, and it takes a sense of humility to openly admit to a patient that you're not comfortable doing something, but recognizing that it was in my best interest as a patient to be seen by someone who knew more than him. I am very grateful, and I really commend him for doing that. And then, there's the flip side where seeking a second opinion really is because you lack confidence in your physician. And my diagnosis and my journey initially started with a seemingly benign lump in the back of my throat. And I remember going to see a local ENT physician, and I was concerned about this. I didn't have a medical knowledge. I was finishing up college, and I was still knew enough to be concerned by the presence of this lump. And I saw the ENT, and I expressed my concerns to her, and I thought, I'd really like to biopsy this. And she just she we just butted heads. She didn't agree. She thought, let's wait and see, and all the while this lump is getting bigger and I'm getting more and more concerned. And ultimately I was like, you know what, this is enough. I need to find someone who will kind of help me explore these concerns and these fears that I'm having, and get me the answer that I'm looking for, because I'm not a wait and watch person. That's not my personality. So to be able to find a provider whose style almost matched mine as a patient, I think was really important. And sure enough, I got a second opinion. I First visit, I immediately had it biopsied, and sure enough, it was amyloid. So, it's unfortunate that there are situations like this, but they do happen. And when those situations arise, and in your gut as a patient, you just know. It sounds cheesy and it sounds cliche that you know your body, but you do.
Mhm.
And regardless of your medical knowledge, I think it's so important that you advocate for yourself. And like you said, if you don't have confidence in the person, find another one. It's not personal. You're doing it
Mhm.
for your best interest. So, um, I just wanted to add in the tidbit that like we talked about, there's really many reasons why, as patients, we seek second opinions.
Mackenzie, may I ask you? I have empathy as a fellow amyloid patient, but I can't imagine as a young person just finishing up college how that you would process that. And can you just mention how you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. It was certainly challenging. I think, when I first got that diagnosis, I was a week or 2 from graduating college, and I of course, I went to Doctor Google, and that was a bad idea. And Google told me I had what? 6 months, 18 months to live, and, I was just gutted. How can you not be? You just your heart sinks. And so to be able to ultimately kind of find my way to a center of excellence and the people who really are leading the way in this disease. I've gone through treatment. I am doing incredibly well. I am like in a complete response. I'm not on any medication. So all is good. And I'm very grateful. And I've certainly learned a lot from the experiences we've had over the years.
Mhm.
So let's go back. Let's talk a bit about the reality. You got your second opinion, it confirmed your multiple myeloma, and then you get the additional diagnosis of AL amyloidosis. Walk me through what that's like, and kind of what's going through your head, what that experience was like for you.
Well, I'm one that does a lot of research, and I asked the doctors pointed question of what it was, and how for, what for, and how come, and so forth. And I feel confident that if I had gone to another facility, it would have been overlooked or not recognized. Well, working with Mayo Clinic, even the technicians could recognize where the amyloid was building up. Uh, 10 to 15% of multiple myeloma patients develop amyloidosis.
Yeah.
And many times it's debated, what comes first.
Mm.
But I felt real confident because the whole healthcare team I was working with knew what they were doing and they educated me. And I sought out other uh, groups, the amyloidosis group, and also seminars and podcasts I could watch to learn more about it. Yeah, it's a shock to my your system, just like any diagnosis, but this one is a rare condition that, as I mentioned before, is often overlooked or misunderstood or ignored. So I feel fortunate. A year and a half later, after I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, I was the doctors had the foresight to do a kidney biopsy and discovered the amyloidosis.
I'm sure it was just, an absolute roller coaster of emotions going through that, and not only getting one devastating diagnosis, but two is certainly a
Mhm.
challenge. And I commend you for going out there and advocating for yourself, and really getting kind of the answers and the support and the care that you wanted.
Mhm.
So in closing, any messages, key takeaways you have for patients who may be listening to us today?
Well, amyloidosis is a very complex condition, a disease. Multiple myeloma is a cancer. Amyloidosis is not, but
Mhm.
it's a very critical condition, very critical condition, and there's some parallels of the way it's treated,
Mhm.
but there's no cure. And after 3 rounds of chemotherapy, my light chains are down. They say I'm in minimum residual uh, remission, I guess you should say, but it's still there. My kidney dysfunction and is still there, and some of the health challenges are still there.
Mm.
And I think you need to continue to be active in your care, or have the support of a family member or friend to be proactive in your health care, because you need to challenge the doctors. And I find that I ask challenging questions to the doctors, and they all appreciate that and value that. And I think that's important, that you need to be proactive in your healthcare, or have a caregiver or someone to be proactive for you, and seeking a second opinion, a third opinion. And sometimes we overlook the fact that the doctors actually work for us as patients.
Yeah. Those are some really excellent points that I think patients facing a similar situation can lean on. So, Mike, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your journey and some really insightful and valuable knowledge for the patients in our community.
Well, glad to do so. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Of course. So, hopefully these thoughts will be helpful to others in thinking about a second opinion, and remind them that self-advocacy is a right for every patient throughout their healthcare journey. Thank you for listening to the All Things Amyloid podcast. If you find our podcast informative, please follow and share it with others. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at Mackenzie's Mission, please visit mm713.org. We'd also like to thank AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Bridge Biopharma for their sponsorship to help raise awareness about amyloidosis. We hope you stay tuned for future episode drops. Thanks for listening.